Welcome to Mystics and Masters. I'm Amy Torres, and my guest today is Will Johnson. Will Johnson is a longtime mentor of mine, an amazing spiritual teacher, and I also consider him a friend. Welcome, Will.
Hi, Amy. Nice to be here.
So bear with me for a moment while I do a little more of a formal introduction, okay?
Sure.
Will received his BA in Art and Archaeology from Princeton in 1968. After graduation, he worked for several years as an art critic in New York before he moved to the West Coast of North America, where Will began actively exploring gazing, moving, and sitting meditations. He became a Buddhist practitioner in 1972 and was trained as a Rolfer in 1976. And then, Will, you began the Embodiment Institute in 95?
Yeah, around there, something like that.
Okay. And I consider you both a Buddhist and a Sufi. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it probably is. And I mean, it's interesting, although I would probably use neither of those words to, completely identify who I am. And what I mean by that, I've never really developed any formal alliances with any particular traditions or lineages in the Buddhist world. For example, yes, I've had Vipassana teachers, Zen teachers, Vajrayana teachers, but I never became formally involved in any of the traditions, preferring within the Buddhist world to focus on the denominator that's common to all those traditions, which is the sitting posture itself. Now, in the Sufi world, I stumbled upon this gazing practice before I probably had ever heard the word Sufis in my early 20s, and it was only sometime later that I realized that this was the practice that Rumi and his great friend, Shams, were exploring behind the closed doors of their retreat room. So, yeah, I've got my, if there's this common spiritual river on one bank is Buddhism, on the other, side is Sufism. I definitely consider myself, a blend of those. And in many ways, it was my exposure to Rumi that really helped me understand what the Buddhist Dharma was actually all about and what its goals were, trying to achieve. So there's definitely been an intermixing there.
Yeah, and it seems to me that when we get to the essence of all religions and spiritual paths, that there is no adequate label anymore.
Yeah, and I'm most interested in that experience that's common to all the paths and all the traditions, and for that matter all the religions as well. I'm much less interested in the specific words and languages and images and symbols that differentiate one tradition from another.
Yes, which is one of the reasons I'm very drawn to your work. And I first learned of your work with, you've written many books. And I believe the first one that I read was The Posture of Meditation, which led me directly to the yoga of the Mahamudra.
Right.
And those books just blew me away because I had a yoga practice at that time and I was sitting rigidly, trying to achieve perfect postures.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Can you explain to the audience what you were saying in those books?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start with The Posture of Meditation. That's probably the book that most people know me from. And look, a lot of this developed out of my own experience. I became very drawn to sitting practices. And like so many people, I would go into retreats and, let's be honest about this, sitting long hours, long days in a retreat, for most people, it can be pretty miserable. There's so much pain that comes up in the body, so much challenge, so much bracing. And over the years, because I was attracted to the practices, but I knew there had to be a better way of doing this. I, came to realize that there were some fundamental mistakes that were being made. And the first one being that I think many people who are drawn to, sitting long hours, long days in, upright meditation posture have this notion that I'm supposed to be sitting as though I'm some kind of stone garden statue of the Buddha, completely still, completely frozen, completely unmoving. And over the years, and look, like anybody, it took me a long time to play with this and struggle with it and dance with it and finally have aha moments when I realized what was going on. And, the major one was that this quality of frozen stillness is antithetical to the goals of Dharma practice. So that those of us who are sitting, trying to be so still in such, frozen postures, what we're doing by that, well, first of all, we're creating a great deal of unnecessary pain in the body. We're stopping breath in its tracks. And it's also clear to me at this point that that kind of frozen stillness is fuel to the fire of the already out of control, unbidden and random thought process of the mind. So, that's where, certainly the most radical thing that I bring to the Buddhist conversation is my insistence that if we want to be, truly relaxed, we have to allow in resilient response to the breath, constant, spontaneous, amoeba-like expansive and contractive motions through the entire body. So it's a very motile kind of experience, somewhat dancerly, frankly, but that, this notion of that we have to sit completely still and not move a muscle is, just isn't working. And, my observation with the Dharma practices that are coming over from Asia, those practices, they've kind of painted themselves into this corner of frozen stillness. And it's time, as here in the West now, we're increasingly bringing our awareness and understanding of somatic process into, the spiritual arena. We're having to realize that body wants to come alive. It doesn't want to put itself into a static mold.
Yes. And my body sings just listening to you speak about this, and always has from the first moment I was introduced to your work, because it clicked and it just made sense.
Yeah, it just makes sense, really.
It makes sense.
Experience it really makes sense.
And it's so unfortunate, but hopefully we will address that by getting this interview out, that so many people are misguided and don't even know that there is another way to approach sitting meditation. Right. They don't even know that there are alternatives. So which came first, the Rolfing and then your awareness of the dynamic stillness, or did it work the other way?
It's really hard to say because it's filtered through. And I was a very young boy. I had some experiences of opening into different kinds of awareness, but that really went underground during my teenage years. And then for me, I got involved with the work of Ida Rolf. I was able to study with her personally. She became a personal mentor. And in many ways, much of what she was attempting to do, I've really taken right over into the spiritual world. And another thing to say for those of us who are familiar with her, or who've been Rolf, she really didn't want Rolfing to develop into the form of work that it's developed into today, which is kind of a glorified form of physiotherapy. She really wanted it to be spiritual practice, although she would never use those. I never heard her use, that terminology, and I never heard her use the word spiritual. But she was, convinced that if human bodies could find their way to a more vertical upright, what that would allow that body to completely relax. And through that relaxation, the phrases that she did use, she would say that evolutionary energies would be stimulated, would be released, would be able to flow through the entire body, resulting in a transformation, an evolutionary transformation of consciousness, which frankly just sounds a whole lot like the Buddhist Dharma to me. And we can maybe talk about some of the more specific things that I got from her that really got transferred into my understanding of sitting. But it probably started there. I was also doing a lot of sitting by the time I met her and was trained as a Rolfer. So there was a back and forth kind of feeding process, but it was over the years, and it was really many of her fundamental principles that opened it up wide open for me.
Yes. I've been through the Rolfing process, and in my life, everything is guided intuitively. So I'm never making some sort of conscious decision about I'm going to do this because I just do it because I feel guided to.
Yeah.
So I went through the Rolfing, and it was painful, as people promised it would be.
Right.
However, my mind got so still during those Rolfing sessions. Yet I didn't put it together with meditative practice or anything like that. I was more of a moving meditation person, more of a yogini and a dancer. So when I read your work, it came together that amazing stillness of my mind during Rolfing sessions and releasing my own personal control over a perfect posture.
Right.
I suddenly clicked into maybe what yoga teachers mean when they say, let the head float lightly at the top of the spine. Like everything held itself up in my body. I wasn't doing it anymore.
Right. Yeah. When people can start playing with this dance of balancing, and I call it that, there is no balance place. We're not like fence posts. It's always, moving, changing with, literally with every, breath we take. But when, we find that we're more organizing ourselves around this imaginary vertical axis, everything starts, flowing and moving. And then it's fascinating, Amy, because what that does, what Dr. Rolf would say would happen, a body that has found this upright line can relax and let go in a way that a body that hasn't can't. Because if a body is, out of alignment, it lets go and it just falls flat. But that relaxation is really nothing, in some ways, more complicated than the willingness and the ability to just surrender the weight of the body to the to the force of gravity. Well, you can do that in this body. You can't do that here. Now, that for her would allow these, energies to get kindled, and then this very curious thing starts happening. Yes, we're relaxing. In other words, surrendering the weight of the body to the pull of gravity. But then this other effect starts occurring. It's kind of an uplifting buoyancy that occurs, as though, the top of our head literally is being drawn to a force analogous to the force of gravity, but acting in the the opposite direction. And that's where the the blessings of relaxation come in. Now, what's fascinating about this, it's never static. It's never static because it's constantly changing. So we can't strive to attain and then maintain an upright posture or a condition of optimal balance. That's even a foolish phrase. I sometimes would think, remember Yoda from Star Wars, that if Yoda were to comment on this, he would say something like, there is no balance, there's only balancing. So it just keeps constantly moving, and life does become very much of a flowing dance. That may be too strong a word. There's constant motion, and the current of the life force can constantly stay flowing through a body that's free and open in this way.
And a very simple analogy is we're like a tree where the roots in the ground are pulled by gravity, and then the branches of the tree move up towards the sun the more we are rooted. Would you say that that's one way to just have a simple grasp of what you're talking about?
Yeah, well, it's actually an image that is experientially accurate, because when you really start letting go. And we'll talk a lot about letting go during our time here together. To me, the practice and the path, it really is just letting go. Letting go of the unnecessary holding and clinging and tensing that we think we need, which we do need when we're, out of alignment, because then we have to brace ourselves against the pull of gravity that we experienced as a destructive force dragging us down. So, when we find our way into this play of balancing, we can, really just start letting go. And then there's this strange phenomenon that occurs, but wonderful, very wonderful, where it almost feels like experientially energetically you're sinking way, way deep down into the earth, while at the same time you're almost being dragged or pulled upwards. So it's almost as though, like a tree with roots or branches, or like, the upright body becomes a kind of lightning rod that can connect the energies of heaven or ground the energies of heaven down, into the earth. So it's very, very much like that. Yeah.
Oh, good, good. And the other way that I experienced this was in yoga when I would do Warrior Two,
Right.
where you're very stretching the arms out through the fingertips. And sometimes a yoga teacher will come over and just take the fingertips and just lengthen them a tad more. And
Right.
after reading your book, I clicked into the horizontal field, and it felt that my fingertips, or the energetic body around them, was being stretched. It was
Yeah.
very pleasant, and I was taking up more space with less effort.
Well, it's literally a stretching from the inside out. Now, my wife Coco often says that this play of balance, it's an inside job. You can't superimpose balance from the outside in. Standing in front of a mirror and say, "Oh, that shoulder's a little high, better bring it down." Oh, bring my head back. You're just going to be uh, superimposing another layer of willful holding, even though it might look good in a still photograph. But obviously, that's not what we're after. And when we start letting go in the way that well, certainly the alignment of the body in sitting posture or standing posture allows us to do. In sitting posture, we work with, playing with the upright alignment, which allows us to let go, which allows us to relax. And then for relaxation to continue over time, that's when we have to start allowing the amoeba-like motions to, to keep occurring. But, when we can start allowing these kind of things to happen, it does feel like from the inside out there's an expansion. Well, it's upwards and downwards, and also forwards and backwards and to the side. It's as though the inner core of the body that ordinarily we are unable to feel because there's too much superficial holding, tensing, resistance, and bracing at the outer sleeve of the body. When that starts letting go, this inner core, right at the very center of our center, it literally starts expanding outwards, and it can go on for basically forever.
Yes. So in yoga classes, usually there's a mirror on the wall, and teachers would suggest that we look in the mirror to see if we were aligned.
Right.
And that was useful.
It is useful.
However, you're always turning your head, which is not good.
To a
And
degree.
say that again.
Well, it's useful to a degree, in in dance classes, they have the mirrors and the bars, and there is something about having that reflection come back to you. Having said that, ultimately, again, it's not an externally reflected process of finding your way to this condition of upright balancing. That it really is far more internal than that.
And when I followed your lead, and also my own intuition, which was always living from the inside out,
Right.
then to just feel into my own experience and allow myself to be guided somehow with a higher wisdom, that's when I encountered the shimmering that you talk about. And you offer something on your website, Will, and all this information will be in the notes at the end. But your website is embodiment.net. And if people go there and put embodiment.net/audio, they will come to your free urban retreat, which I have taken more than once, and it is priceless. And I believe in there you talk about hollow bamboo dharma, and you explain that you can feel yourself, you can feel your blood flowing, you can feel your cells alive. And that seemed impossible when I first heard that. And yet I began to, with practice, see that that was true.
Yeah, absolutely. And, generally when I start a workshop or a retreat, it doesn't take too long when we want to start opening up the direct experience of body as a unified field of shimmering tactile sensations. And these sensations are almost impossibly small in size, and they're oscillating and shimmering, frankly, at almost impossibly rapid rates of vibratory frequency, but we can still feel them. And so, people who are watching this, generally what I have people do is just hold out a hand with the palm facing up. And if you just put your awareness in that hand, it doesn't take very long until you start realizing that hand, it sure ain't solid and unmoving. There's a huge amount of shimmer, these minute little pinprick blips of sensation that are constantly moving, constantly oscillating, constantly vibrating. Some are very pleasurable, some are frankly painful, some maybe don't have an emotional tone one way or the other, but they exist on every single part of the body down to the smallest cell. And a major focus or intention of the work that I do with people, I want people to, in a sense, start having a direct experience of what it is that actually sits here. Now look, ordinarily what passes as normal in the world at large, the consciousness that passes as normal, it's a primarily disembodied consciousness. And what I mean by that, we are very involved in this ongoing parade of unbidden and random thoughts. We're literally lost in thought. And when we're lost in thought, it's kind of like a teeter-totter. When you're lost in thought, you have no awareness of bodily presence, of felt presence, of the feeling presence of the shimmer. So what's interesting about a teeter-totter, you can change that. So when you start giving yourself permission, and it's interesting, Amy, but giving permission, I think, is probably one of the most potent forms of instruction that I share with people, because it's just literally to be given permission that it's okay to feel. It's okay to be aware of this, dimension of felt, shimmering, palpable, real, actual feeling presence. When we start totally sensationalizing the entire body, I joke sometimes, sensations are sensational, right? But when we sensationalize the entire body, when we shift gears from this place that is lost in thought and has no awareness of this, to a place that, suddenly the feeling presence is just flowing right through the entire body, that's when often it's as though a plug gets pulled on the parade of thoughts in the mind. And then we go very silent. We go very, very still. But we have to awaken the body to enter into that quality of dynamic stillness.
As a Course in Miracles student and somebody who came to spirituality through psychotherapy, healing in myself in psychotherapy, this is thrilling to me, because I often say we need to use the body to undo the body. And I've spoken with you before about my discovery that we move from story to sensation.
Right.
So in my psychotherapy work, I wasn't thinking about spirituality, but as I was given permission, as you say, to feel my feelings and have needs, which in my upbringing was somehow communicated, that's taboo, so that, most of us, especially a certain kind of person, a more codependent or oral character, doesn't know that they have needs that they're unaware of. And they've taken pride in being a low maintenance, unneedy person. So to
Right.
contact emotion
Right.
is, death in a certain way. And this death is a good death, a necessary death. And then after I felt my feelings, at a certain point in psychotherapy, pretty early on, I felt drawn to yoga again. I had been in yoga and then stopped yoga and I went back. And oh my God, Will, I just started involuntarily weeping in yoga class because it was breaking through the muscular defenses, I guess, of my body. And I was softening from the inside out and all these tears started flowing. Can you speak to any of what I just shared?
Oh, I completely resonate with that. A couple of things to share right off the bat that I often share with people, because sometimes, with the books I've written and in the teaching that I do, people must assume I was born, I popped out of my mom's belly, and I completely was in touch with all my sensations. Such a non-body person by birth. And for me, it was very kind of mindy and sort of artsy. And I was so out of touch with, with my body. So, it's been such a strong and powerful reentry for me as well. But yeah, what you're saying, that so often, we're so blocking the wisdom, the ongoing wisdom information that's coming right through bodily sensation right now, that we lose touch with what our needs are. We lose touch with what we might be feeling when we're feeling something, let alone just this very, very subtle quality of the shimmer of sensations and the exploding open of body from kind of, frankly, a concept at arm's length that we don't feel much of anything, into this, this field of, well, it's sensation and space. And once we're able to make that shift, there's no way that we don't enter into realms of experience that we've traditionally used the word spiritual to describe. It's just part of who we are. To me, spiritual is just fundamental. It's just our natural condition that we're holding ourselves back on. It kind of sounds like a fancy word. Oh, I'm manifesting spiritual states or something. It's not like that. It's just about being human, or really allowing the fullest potential of what is so naturally human, just to be here and to come forward. And the other thing to share about this, for me, what all of this practice is about, ultimately, it's where my body feels the best. End of story. That these very wide open states, the phrase I often use these days, I call it the great wide open, when the kind of claustrophobic identity just dissolves away, and the next thing we're just expanding, and the visual field almost feels like it's part of me rather than something out there, and we're just expanding. That's where bodies feel good. And anything less than that, we're really shortchanging ourselves on the ecstatic joy that is a natural state. Ecstasy is a word that I'm very drawn to, from the point of view that if you break that word up, ecstatic means moving away from this condition of frozen stillness, coming out of a cocoon of holding and frozen stillness, and entering into a much more vibrantly dynamic, flowing, moving, non-static state. So for me, the ecstatic is simply the natural.
That is great. I also love talking about the pragmatic reward of just feeling good in your body. And that spirituality, although it sounds lofty, is actually our natural state. So I would say it's moving from human to being, and that being is the ground of the human, you might say.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually, it's as though I don't know, it's hard to say. I'm not any kind of historian of consciousness, but there is a natural condition that culturally we've set up lots of barriers against staying aligned with and being in touch with. So, it's a matter of just dissolving, really softening, dissolving those barriers, because those barriers are formed of, frankly, holding, bracing within the myofascia of the body, and softening that, and then these natural states just start coming forward, and we don't have to strive to attain, and certainly not maintain. We just have to give ourselves permission to let go and allow. And it's easier said than done, because these states are really we're strongly conditioned by them. But
And
I'll just add one more thing. As my oldest son is fond of saying, if my dad can do this, anybody can do this. And he's really right about that. I mean that sincerely.
I really appreciate you sharing, that you weren't born to it. And it appears that way. When we go to a teacher, it seems like, you were always like this, or it came easily to you. But actually your background, when I think about it, that you were into art and archaeology, and you became an art critic. That's very heady and analytical.
Very much so.
And I find that people need to process their emotions before they can get through the initial barriers, and then they're more likely for barriers to turn into veils and start to experience the shimmering.
Yeah. That's nicely put. And certainly for me as a young man, I did psychotherapeutic work that helped me get in touch with basic needs and emotions that I was so out of touch with. I had all these ideas of who I was, but the ideas and this direct experience, that's coming through the human body right now, they can be miles and miles apart. So first of all, becoming aware of some of that, and then it just very naturally became very palpable and very, very physical, that way.
Yes. I want to tell you some of my favorite books of yours. There's Rumi's 4 Essential Practices, Ecstatic Body, Awakened Soul. And after I read this book, I walked around telling everybody that they didn't really understand Rumi. And there was even more to discover about Rumi. And, you shared with us that his practices, he had these 4 practices of eat lightly, move freely, gaze raptly, and breathe deeply.
Mm-hmm.
Before you might get into that, I also want to share that there's another book, Eyes Wide Open, Buddhist Instructions on Merging Body and Vision. And when you spoke of vision a little while ago, it reminded me of Sufis, not Buddhists. It reminded me of the whirling dervishes. And I've done the turn. I'm a Sufi initiate with the Chishti order of Hazrat Inayat Khan. And when I do the turn, vision is used in a completely new way. And there's just this visual blending. And as you know, the Sufis talk about love, harmony, and beauty. And it's clear to me that you're drawn to beauty. And even the covers of your books are very beautiful. And for me, that melts away barriers, just gazing raptly, not only into another's eyes, but it's something that I find beautiful. And it could be something that magazines would call ugly, but I might find it beautiful. It doesn't matter what it is, rocks or...
Right. Yeah, so it is. It's interesting. I go to university, and frankly, I just had trouble. I was a kid that books were my thing. I got good grades. I was able to go to this Ivy League university, but most of the conventional courses I just couldn't relate to, and the only thing that drew me was art history. Now, at that time, I thought maybe I would go on to graduate school and become a museum curator or something like that. Now, I may be considered old-fashioned in this way, but aesthetics are still very important to me. I really experience sound, visual information as potentially truly enriching and ennobling, human being, and beauty, things that strike you in this way that you have a whole body response to, whether it's sound or vision or smell or taste, I suppose, although those are lesser for me, maybe not so for other people. It's important, to me that way. And certainly the visual has been very, very, very important. But the book that you mentioned, Rumi's Four Essential Practices, as I kept getting drawn more into that orbit, and then really went through the whole of the divan, which are the assembled poems, everything that Rumi uttered. One thing, for people who are watching this, we all, most of us who are probably watching this know of Rumi a little bit. The poems are amazing, right?
Yeah.
Rumi never wrote a single word. They are all spontaneous utterances after his large opening. I think of him more as kind of like an ecstatic street rapper or something. You just wander around town, and look, if you really read through everything, it's not all peaches and cream. He could be very, very rough. And I have this vision of him walking out in the morning, and the musicians are with him, and his body is moving. Now, one thing that often happens for people that really get a profound awakening through the body, we become dancers. Whether we think of ourselves as dancers or not, the body just starts moving. And you read some of these poems that read more almost like journal entries, frankly. And in one poem, it might be the course of a day, and he comes across some of the people who love him, and then the words just come out so beautiful. And then he rounds another corner, and they're the naysayers, and he's harsh with, he's pretty strong with them. But it became very, very clear to me that Rumi was extremely and deeply body-oriented in his practices. We'll probably get into talking about the gazing practice at some point. One of the things about the gazing practice, it wildly stimulates your awareness of feeling presence and of the sensations, and wildly starts letting you feel into how it's being held back, and then it just starts letting go. So it's very, very deeply somatic. Fasting for Rumi, it wasn't about religious penance. He would say he liked to fast because it makes him very drunk, right? Because when you get past the the times of all the ache that comes out of fasting, you can get very, very high with fasting. Obviously, the the moving, the dance, central to Rumi's the Mevlevi tradition, completely physical and bodily oriented. And then the breathing. I mean, just to share this, Rumi was clearly a great breather. And now here we're joining Sufism with Dharma practices, because a lot of what Buddhism is, you sit down, you breathe. Many years ago, Tricycle magazine, they put out a book. It was a compendium of articles from that year, and their buzz phrase on the front of the book for what Buddhism was sit down and breathe. Now mostly in Dharma circles, and this is one of the ways that I start veering away from some of the traditional Dharma practices. Mostly Dharma practices follow the first instruction of the Buddha, which is just simply to start observing breath. And he actually says to do it at the front of the body. So most Dharma traditions will maybe focus on breath as it enters and leaves the nostrils, or as the belly rises and falls, but it doesn't stop there. And within a short period, the Buddha gives his culminating instruction on breathing, saying, as you breathe in through the whole body, not just be aware of it at the front of the surface of the body, but to experience it. So breath starts out maybe as an object to observe, but becomes this agent to surrender to, really to let go through. And Rumi really helped me with this, as I would read some of his very ecstatic descriptions of breathing. And the one that I particularly like the best. And to me, is him saying the same thing as the Buddha, who is, more sober and talks in more of kind of a shorthand. When the Buddha says, as you breathe in through the whole body. What Rumi says is bringing breath to life is the essence of every religion. And he goes on to say it's the cure for every illness. That's a strong statement. Then he says, let every breath you take cleanse the soul. And for Rumi, soul, a body is simply the physical expression of soul. So he says, let every breath you take cleanse the soul of its grief and pain so it can continue to burn brightly inside you. And that really helped me understand what the Buddha was getting at when he would say, as you breathe in, breathe in through the whole body. Have it almost like the body is this pranic balloon that you just let go and it fills, and you let go and it empties, and you let go. You breathe in and it fills. So Rumi is marvelously body oriented. One last thing to share with the folks who are watching this. Rumi got this early on, I think, from his father, who was an accomplished mystic in his own right, and he taught Rumi a practice or an orientation. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. It's called Maya. And what Maya says is that God, or whatever word works for you, the bigness, the fullness, cannot be found in the mind alone, cannot be found in the heart alone, but needs to be felt throughout the entire body. So that's the the foundation that Rumi comes out of, and it's so wonderfully supportive of this body-oriented approach now that is increasingly, I believe, or I certainly want to believe, is being recognized as fundamental and foundational for, again, this word, spiritual opening and growth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's thrilling that you bring Rumi to life and make him more real for us so that we're more absorbent. We're able to sponge him in fully instead of just enjoy a poem, which is not enough. Yeah. And there was something that you said, that, we're given this simple instruction to, when we breathe in through the whole body. And when I finally comprehended what you were saying and what you were communicating in your own grasp of this, it was much more than an aha moment. It was like a thunderclap. And I realized I was experiencing myself as a two-dimensional figure, only relating to the front of myself in this kind of flat cardboard way. And that there was, there was a roundness and a completeness to this manifestation that was completely unexplored.
Right. And, most of us, where we start out, and this is where I think it was brilliant that the Buddha says, start out by becoming aware of your breath at the front of the body, because that's where people live. We're identified with, I often say, we all have the same name for ourselves. We call ourselves I, right? And this is this claustrophobic, egoic consciousness. Nothing wrong with it. It's one of the, it's one of the necessary ways we have to, live in the world. But if we just live there, we just become compressed and out of touch. And it's as though we become identified with the persona or a mask, which sits right out at the front of our body, very two-dimensional. And we start opening, more and more, start softening. And it becomes, as you're saying, very round, very three-dimensional. Now, look, ultimately, first of all, we want to awaken the body, but then the next huge step, and we're probably jumping way ahead in this conversation, is we want to realize that all these sensations that are the body, they're not necessarily my sensations either. They're the feeling presence of what I call the great wide open, or Dharma practitioners might call the realm of Nibbana or Sunyata or the Mahamudrik ground state, coming through the conduit of the body, wanting to actually use our individual bodies to express themselves here within this very, very physical dimension here on Earth. But it does, it gets so much fuller and so much bigger. And I'm remembering an early Nyingma teacher of mine. He said, you know, we talk in Buddhism about emptiness and about the void. He said, let's clear something up right from the beginning. The void is very full, right? So it's this very, very large full. At the same time, kind of fundamentally, I guess empty is the word, you know, empty of individual self, full, extremely full of, frankly, extraordinary presence.
Yes. Yes. I remember doing some Sufi practices where, you know, we would connect with the heart and breathe through the heart and then discover that we were actually within the cosmic heart, which was beating us.
Yeah.
And
the breath is breathing us. The heartbeat is beating us. The breath is breathing us. I mean, it is. Although we do our level best, tragically, when we're locked within this consciousness that passes as normal, to hold back on that, right?
mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Will, this conversation is so rich and I find it thrilling that I think this is a good dose for our audience right now. And I'd like to invite viewers, if you would like to get some exclusive content where Will and I will continue our conversation a bit longer, for those of you who feel moved to donate.
Yeah.
So, and of course, to find out more about Will's work, in the titles at the end, I will supply links, and he has fascinating books for you to read. And you can tell he's synthesized Buddhism, Sufism, Rolfing, so many things, and come into his own way of teaching. So I thank you from the bottom of my heart for speaking with us, Will, and I hope you'll come back another time for the public view. But right now, I just like to say thank you and namaste.
Yeah, back at you. Thank you and namaste too. It's always fun to do this with you, Amy.